All right, real quick before this video starts, I just want to say that I've been seeing everyone's comments. I read every single comment, and like, it has been such a trip seeing how much support I've been getting on my DaVinci edits, and like seeing how many people like to watch my videos. Like, I've never experienced this before. And I also want to thank all the people that have been commenting, asking for tutorials. I know it's been a while since I dropped a tutorial, but I've been procrastinating this one because it's kind of big. So yeah, shout out Envy, what you doing? Squadron 29, Foreseen, 𝙀𝘍𝙬𝙑𝙀, 𝙁𝙍𝙀𝙎, 𝙁𝙍𝙬𝙑𝙀, Canine and Rice.mp3 for asking for tutorials. This video is for y'all. Actually, it's for everyone that wants to learn DaVinci Resolve, and I hope you guys enjoy this video. All right, what's up guys? This is Nathan Reed, and this tutorial is basically just going to be a complete start to finish guide going over my whole DaVinci Resolve workflow when it comes to editing. So we're going to start with raw clips, and then we're going to finish with a final product. I'll be going over how I edit clips, a little bit of velocity, pan crop, what effects I like to use. I'll be talking about reactor, I'll be talking about color grading. The editing part will kind of apply to any video software, but as far as like the project settings and render settings and all that I'm going to be using, that will be an important part of this video. So without further ado, I'm just going to create a new project. And yeah, I'll show you guys the clips that I'm going to be using for this. I'm just going to do 2 clips. And I'm not going to be going over 3D in this video because that is something that I don't think I'm qualified to make a tutorial on. But anyways, here's the clips that I'm going to be using. This is the first one. I'm just going to skip through this part because I'm kind of wandering around for a minute. These are my clips, by the way. Alright, so that's the first clip, and this is the second one. Alright, those are the 2 clips I'm going to be using, so you can literally just... And everything in here is the same between Mac and Windows, by the way. So you can just drag them into the media pool, basically. And I like to just start in the edit tab. So we got, I can't even remember what these 2 are called, media and cut tabs. I just start in the edit tab because it has everything that these 2 have. It's just, this is where you're mainly going to be doing like timeline editing. So the next thing you want to do before you drag them into the timeline is you want to create an actual timeline. So I usually just, we'll start with velo plus motion blur. So this will be velocity and motion blur timeline. And what you want to do, I actually forgot to do custom settings, but what you can also do is go right click it, timelines, timeline settings, and then uncheck use project settings. Here, when it says mismatch resolution, you want to change this to stretch frame to all corners. So basically what that does is if your composition and your clip have a different aspect ratio, like for example, I play stretched, so this was recorded at like, I don't know what it's like 1280 by whatever that weird resolution is. Like it's a different aspect ratio, but when you put it in the timeline, it will stretch it so that it just touches all 4 corners. All the corners of the frame like match up. So the song I have is Bands in My Pocket by 𝙀𝘍𝙬𝙁. You're just gonna wanna drag your song into the timeline on audio 2. So here's what the song sounds like. So yeah, basically the first thing that you're gonna wanna do that I usually do is kind of make a map of your clips according to the song. And some people like to do this using markers. So you can create markers by pressing M. And if you press M on it again, you can remove the marker or change the marker settings. And it's just these little blue things right here. That's what a marker is. But personally, I just kind of zoom into the waveform and go according to the waveform. So yeah, what you're gonna want to do for this kind of part of the editing process is find the places where you want there to be like impact, or like that you want to be synced to the beat. So for example, if I'm going through this raise clip, I want the first beat to kind of be like when she puts the blast back down. So I'll probably start it like right there. So I want the first beat to be like that pretty much. And then it's Command B or Control B if you're on Windows to slice. And then you can do Shift Delete to ripple delete, or you can just delete it and move the other clip. Then you're gonna want to find where the next beat of the music is. So like probably at this clap right here. Okay, like right about there. And then just cut it again, and that's it. Then you basically just want to go through and find like every kind of, this is a little bit hard to explain, but I'll just like kind of do it so you guys can see what I'm talking about, and talk you guys through it while I'm doing it. So like the next kind of point of impact I want is when I actually jump, like right there. You can see the blast back exploding. So I'll cut it right there and then ripple delete. There, and then I want this kind of turning to be the next impact. I think it's right there. And then I want the frame when that 𝙀𝘿𝙄𝙏 shows up is where you're gonna want to clip it for these parts. So yeah, that's kind of the flow that I'm going for there. And so to switch to the trim tool, you can press T, and then if you want to like kind of scrub through a clip, you can do that, and like it starts at a later point, or you can drag it to start at an earlier point. It just kind of scrubs through the clip, and then A to get back to the arrow tool. I think I want this one to start like right about there. So for the next one, I want to do like kind of a glitch where it does the same clip twice. And what you can do, what I just did there was if you select the clip and then hold Option and then drag, it duplicates it and you can kind of drag it to wherever. All right, and then the next one is going to be the Astra kill. So that's when the kill banner shows up. Cut it, delete, move that to the beat where you want that to happen. Right now it looks kind of choppy, but that doesn't matter because we're going to add velocity later. So yeah, don't worry about that if it looks kind of choppy right now. Oh yeah, another useful keybind. I think I might have customized this one, but this magnet right here, I don't know if it's default Z, or if I changed it to Z, but you can change it to whatever you want. Snapping is important. So what snapping does is if I have snapping on, and you're cutting a clip, it will snap to wherever your playhead is. If you turn snapping off, that's gray now instead of white, you can go frame by frame, even if the playhead is like right there. Or you can move frame to frame without snapping to the end of other clips. So if I turn snapping back on, it'll snap to the end of that clip or the end of that clip. Snapping off, it goes frame by frame. So that's just a way if you want to get more precise with your edits, you can turn snapping off. All right, so just basically the bottom line here is to make sure that you're having your cuts line up with the beats of the music. And that's where people usually put markers like on the beats so they can like know where it is in the timeline, but like I don't really do that. I just kind of look at the waveform and eyeball it. All right, so I'm just gonna do the second clip. I'm basically gonna do the same thing with the second clip, but I'm not gonna make you guys watch that. So I'll come back when I'm done with that in a second. All right, I finished mapping out the second clip, so this is what that looks like. Okay, so the next part of the editing process in my workflow is basically just doing velocity and motion blur. And that's pretty easy after doing this whole map thing, because basically all you have to do is go and select whatever clip you want to do, go into Fusion, and once you do this for one clip, it's basically like relatively the same for all the clips. You might have some variation, but like the process, it remains exactly the same. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because I already covered it in a previous tutorial, and you can watch that on my channel if you want to. Alright, so if you're not used to node-based editing, DaVinci Resolve is mainly node based. So step one, I go, oh, and by the way, it's command space or control space to search for a node. You can find it in the effects page. If you click effects over here, you can find all your nodes in here, but I usually just search for them with command space. So the first thing you want to do is get the time stretcher. And if it doesn't automatically hook up, you can just go in, out to in there, and that'll hook it up. So this is basically how you put nodes in. Then what you want to do is, see this number right here? This tells you the start and end frames of your original clip. So what you want to do is copy this and put it in here while you're at the beginning. Make sure you're at the beginning in the timeline right here. Then what you want to do is go to the last frame. And the last frame is not this yellow line actually. The yellow line is the beginning of the next clip. The last frame of this clip is right here. So you can press this arrow and you can go to the last frame of this, and then if you have it lined up, you can copy the last frame here and go like that. But if you want to have it at a different spot, you can just kind of move this to wherever you want. So I think I wanted her to just be throwing down the satchel, so that could end like right about there. And then what you're gonna do is go into spline. This is basically Fusion's graph editor, and source time is what we were just automating. So click source time, go here, and then you can select each keyframe to adjust its Bezier curve. So yeah, I usually do a little something like this, and then I put a keyframe in the middle, and you can click on the curve to create a keyframe, and then I just kind of flatten it out in the middle so it's like slow, or goes fast, slow, fast. Preview, that looks okay. I think I want to move this down a little bit. Okay, that looks about good. And then after I do the time stretching, and and another thing to keep in mind is when you do this, you want to put another keyframe on literally the next frame after the last one and just go up a little bit. Because when you add motion blur, basically when it's flat like this, it's telling the time stretcher that these are all the same frame. So when you put motion blur on it, there won't be any motion blur on the last frame, because the next one, like the theoretical next frame, it will be the same. So what you want to do is add another keyframe and just move it up so that there's going to be motion blur on the last frame. But yeah, basically after you do the time stretching and you want to do pan crop, you do pan crop here. And I also have a tutorial on pan crop, so if you want to watch that to get a more in-depth tutorial on pan cropping, go ahead and watch that. It's also on my channel. So I'm just going to do a quick pan crop. I think I just want to have it zoom out. And then uncheck sort time. Doopy doopy doo. Alright. Yeah, that's better. And then I'm also going to do a little bit of rotation, I think. Oh, and one thing to make sure you do is make sure the edges are on mirror so that there's no like just random black space on the edge of your frame. And I'll do the same kind of curve for this one. Alright, that's pretty good. Okay, and then so basically after you do time stretcher and transform, you're going to want to put an optical flow node before this and the optical flow node after it. And the reason we're doing two is because this optical flow node is to feed vectors into the time stretcher, and this optical flow node is going to feed vectors into the motion blur, which I will add in a second. Actually, I'll just do it right now, fuck it. Motion blur, vector motion blur is the node that you want to have. So this is nice and easy because it's straight up just a linear flow. There's no like weird node mapping or anything that you have to do for this part. But yeah, basically then the next step is to go into the time stretcher, change this to flow, fastest on top, clamp edges, make sure to check clamp edges, and then just check all of these. And that's all you have to do for that. And then motion blur, you can adjust this to however much motion blur you want to have, but I usually like to put it on 0.5 if you have 60 FPS clips. 0.5 is usually good. So with all that together, oh wait, I just realized my render cache is not on. So here's another tip. If you want to have a render cache, instead of just rendering everything in real time, you can go in playback, and then when you go, go in render cache, you can do smart or user. I usually just leave it on smart. And basically this orange line will show up. The orange means that it's not rendered. But if you play it and just kind of let it play for a sec, or sometimes you don't play it and it just kind of renders on its own, it'll start turning blue, and blue means it is rendered. And then once this all turns blue, you can view your cached render. Alright, so here's what that one clip looks like. You can see a little bit of that motion blur at the beginning there. Alright, so that's basically that whole process, and I'm pretty much just gonna copy that. Not copy exactly, but I'm gonna repeat that process for every single one of these, and yeah, I'll come back when I'm done with that. Alright, so one thing I forgot to mention is that if you want to do camera shake, like I usually put that on anything I want to have like extra impact. Like for example, if she's like, you know, flying out of hookah right here, I could put a camera shake on it. And you always want to put it in between the time stretch and the transform. Like if you're holding a camera in real life and something like exploded or is like rumbling, you're gonna be shaking like up and down more. So I usually leave the Y deviation like up more, and then kind of put the speed like around there usually. And then basically you're just gonna automate the strength. So I usually go from 1 to go to the end of the clip and then turn it all the way down. You kind of just basically mess with the curve until it looks right. There's no like one way to do it. It kind of just depends on the clip, I guess. But one weird thing about camera shake in DaVinci Resolve is it kind of bugs out when you automate the speed. So don't automate the speed, just leave the speed at one level. Don't keyframe that. I just want it to be like pretty subtle. Like camera shake is one of those things where you can't overdo it. Alright, it's easy to overdo it rather. And usually when I'm doing this and I'm kind of looking at like how transforming the clip, I usually look at a mini map because it's something that stays still on the screen the whole time. So that's how you do camera shake. Yeah, I'm just gonna continue working on these and I'll be back in a sec. To mention, because I only kind of recently found out about it, thanks to Punisher on YouTube, love you Clint, is that you can get a much more realistic look to your motion blur and like preserved highlights by gamma correcting it. Let me just show you guys a side by side. This is without gamma correction, with gamma correction. See how those highlights are so nicely preserved without gamma correction, with gamma correction. Okay, so this is really easy. Basically the way you do this is you make 2 color corrector nodes, one before the optical flow and one after the motion blur. And so this button right here is to create a color corrector, just so you guys know. So on the first one, you want to put the gamma at 0.1, and then on the second one, you just put the gamma on 10. So 0.1 times 10 obviously equals 1. So they cancel out, leaving you with like the same brightness level, but preserving highlights. I'm still not 100% sure how this actually works, but it better simulates how actual cameras work. So yeah. Alright, so I finished the velocity and motion blur throughout the whole thing. Here's what it looks like. So yeah, basically, don't be scared if this takes a long time, because this probably took me like a couple hours. And don't feel discouraged if it doesn't look like amazing, because like obviously flow is just kind of something that you learn through doing it more. Like the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Obviously your first edit isn't going to be amazing. But anyways, moving on, the next part of this process is going to be adjusting the sound. So a lot of people like to have sound assets from whatever game, usually Valorant. Like they have, for example, Valorant sound assets, and they just take out all the sound and just add in their custom sound effects. But personally, I like to just keep the sound from the clips and just cut out like anything that's unnecessary and kind of like adjust it to the way I want it to. So for now, I'm gonna mute the song just so you can kind of hear what this sounds like. Okay, so obviously it's kind of weird because I have like some glitches and stuff like that. It doesn't really, the sound doesn't really flow that well. So listening to this part, I think I Oh, and then what you have to do for this part also is unlink. So this means that you can select just the audio or just the video individually for each clip. Whereas if you have the link on, if you select one, it selects the audio that goes with it. So turn link off. So for this part, I think I want to extend the blast pack sound a little bit. And then to like the beginning of like the shooting. So that sounds pretty good. Like that kind of mixes a little bit better. Yeah, and then I don't want to have her say see it twice, so like I can just delete that and then maybe extend this a little bit and then have it fade out just so it's like smooth. Like that sounds good. And I also don't really want that there either. And I can also just extend this back slightly and fade it in. Basically the goal is to just make these sound effects kind of like, it doesn't have to be like perfect, but just so that it complements the video and doesn't like distract from the music, if that makes sense. And a lot of times what I like to do is, depending on the song and like the flow, sometimes I'll put a filter on the game audio, or maybe like reverb or something, just to kind of make it feel like it's more in the background. But I think for this one, I'm just gonna leave it as is. So all this reloading sounds, that lines up pretty well already. I don't think I need to do anything for that. I do want to extend this though. I'm just gonna fade that out actually. Yeah, so you can add crossfades between audio clips as well. So like that sounds a lot smoother now. And I'm actually gonna, again, like these voice lines are kind of unnecessary, so I'm just gonna cut them out and then fade out the previous audio clip. Like that's a lot cleaner. And I'll fade this one in a little bit. And like if there's comms, like this guy's saying elbow, you can cut that out as long as it doesn't kind of like interfere with the other sound effects, but like it's kind of overlapping with the 𝙁𝙄𝙏 sound effects. So I'm just gonna leave it in there because it's not like too outstanding. And in there, like obviously it doesn't play the whole ace sound effects. So I'm just gonna like extend that a little bit because this clip doesn't really have any important audio. Yeah, I don't need this either. There's like nothing in there. Again, this might sound weird having no audio now, but when the music is over it, it's just, you're not going to notice it. So yeah, this, we don't need that. I'm just going to kind of extend that knife sound, so it's just kind of one sound instead of like having the two here. Actually, I'm not going to extend it because that guy's comms is kind of interfering, so I'm going to cut out his comms there. Yeah, I don't care for having a sound effect here, but I do want one here, obviously. Just fade that in. Yeah, and then obviously you can extend that and do a little fade out there. So that's just basically kind of cleaning up the sound effects to kind of just remove anything that will distract from the music. And yeah, this is what that's going to sound like with the music. So yeah, that's just a lot cleaner and less kind of unnecessary noise happening. And you can also do that in Fairlight too, which is like at the audio section, the audio tab of DaVinci. But honestly, like I would use this for like mixing more than audio editing. If you want to just edit the audio clips like I was doing, I usually just do that in the edit tab. So anyways, moving on. After you finish this pass, what you want to do is render it. I usually do this just because the velocity and motion blur and all that is kind of taxing on my computer, and I don't want to try and do like creative editing, like one frame glitches and all that. and like color grading with the motion blur, like trying to render behind all of it. So I'd rather just kind of render it out and then use that render as like my base for the next steps of the process. So I'm just gonna call it tutorial pre-render. And then what you're gonna want to do is change this to AVI. Codec can be on GoPro Cineform, that's fine. Actually, no, change this to uncompressed. Make sure that's on uncompressed. And then color space is fine. 1920 by 1080, this is what you want. You made the timeline as a 1920 by 1080 timeline. Render it at 1920 by 1080, 24 FPS. And then make sure that the audio is on. Sometimes this is just like unchecked by default, I'm not sure why. Make sure this is on. All this is fine. Yeah. And then do add to render queue and render all. So yeah, after you render the motion blur velocity pass, you can basically drag that into your media pool. Okay, now what you're gonna wanna do is right click, create a new timeline, and we can just call this one, I'll just call it effects. So then once you create this, drag your, right, there's this one, tutorial pre-render, drag that into the timeline. And you basically have this pre-render of what we just, everything that we just did. And what I usually like to do is, just for organization's sake, I just like to cut it at the same points that it was cut in this timeline. So I'll just do that real quick so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Alright, so I've chopped everything up how it was before. This next part of the editing process is definitely the most fun. Basically, this is where we're just gonna start doing like flickers and, you know, all this kind of color effects. Flickers, glows, color grading. Well, actually, we'll go into color grading later. One frame glitches, you know, messing with the exposure and all that stuff. Maybe we'll do a little like depth of field type thing and blur. But yeah, I'm just gonna get started with this first one. You know, I'm actually gonna start this one out with like fading in from black. So we'll go up to like there and spline graph. Yeah, and this is basically where you get to have like as much fun with it as you want. There's pretty much no rules. You can do literally whatever you want, and this is kind of what gives edits your own style, if that makes sense. This is like kind of where you get to put your own kind of taste into the edit. So yeah, there's not really any like right or wrong way to do this. You just kind of do whatever looks good to you. And yeah, I'm gonna go through like a few effects that I like to do, and I'll also talk about reactor, but aside from that, I'm not gonna go too much into depth about these type of effects that I'm doing, because it's really just up to you what you want to do for like color effects. So yeah, DaVinci Resolve does have a node called Flicker Edition, which is super nice. This is basically what it looks like. I'm gonna max it out just to demonstrate. You can turn the speed up. It's a pretty good flicker, but one thing that you do want to make sure you're doing is you want to change this to flicker gain, because that gain is more like exposure. If you flicker gamma, you're just kind of adding to every single value, color value, as opposed to gain. Gain is a lot more like realistic, if that makes sense. So like what if you were to actually turn up the exposure on a camera. You can also automate the range of the flicker. And then this is like right before an explosion. So I'm actually gonna do a trick I learned from anime. A lot of times before like a big explosion, they'll have one frame where the color is like inverted. You can automate the blend. So I'm gonna have it turn the blend on 0 the whole clip, and then on the last frame the blend goes to 100%. And the keyframe stuff, you just click this button to add a keyframe, and then you can also edit those keyframes in spline. Actually, I'm gonna have it invert the color on the second to last frame instead. So you can kind of get more of that like flickery effect. Yeah. I like that. And then for this one, I'm gonna do kind of like a pretty standard gain automation. So I'm gonna, at the beginning, I'm just gonna turn the gain up, keyframe it, go forward a bit, and then put it back at 0. And then you can edit this in spline to be more of a shallow curve. That's pretty subtle, but I think I want it that way. And then I'm also gonna add a flicker to this one just for effect, just to keep things moving. Color effects are like an easy thing to overdo, and sometimes that is the move if you have like a really glitchy song that you kind of want to match the energy of. But like a lot of the time, less is more with these type of things. Because like velocity and motion blur is really the heart of the edit. So this is kind of just like the sprinkles on top, you know? And sometimes you have like some crazy hyperpop song, it's like really glitchy, and that warrants a lot of sprinkles on top. But for this specific song, I think I could just go with like minimal effects. I like to give kills a lot more impact. So, you know, sometimes I'll, you know, you can see I did the gain automation on this. I'll also like to put yeah, some type of blur on it. Any type of blur works, but I like to use defocus gamma. And this would actually be a really good time to talk about Reactor. So Reactor is basically a script that you can download for DaVinci Resolve, or for Fusion rather, that allows you to like import a bunch of custom plugins. And I'll put a link to a video in the description of how to install Reactor and how to use it, because I don't want this to also be a Reactor tutorial. It's really easy. But I'm just gonna show you guys the plugins that I use the most and the ones that I have installed, so that you can kind of follow along with this video. If I can find fucking Reactor. Oh, open Reactor, okay, there we go. All right, so this is what Reactor looks like once you have it open. It's this window right here. So yeah, here's all the ones that I've installed. Chromatic displacement, colorama, defocus gamma, depth defocus. But yeah, the ones I use the most, I would say, are defocus gamma, fast chroma, and the MT glitch tools. 𝙀𝘿𝙄𝙏 is also pretty good. So yeah, that's my essentials. But yeah, that's basically Reactor. So once you guys have those installed, hopefully you can kind of follow along better if you want to do the same type of effects that I do. Going back to this, defocus gamma is just a really good blur, and it gives you kind of that nice bokeh effect if you turn the image gamma like all the way up to 9. This is basically doing the same thing as when we did the gamma correction earlier for the motion blur. That's what this is doing, except for this specific blur. So yeah, I'm just gonna automate this kind of the same way I did the gain, and then do it like that. And I think I want to mess with the color a little bit too here. I'll just like tint it like red for like 1 frame. That looks pretty good. So this is also how you do 1 frame glitch. It's literally just you put an effect on literally anything you want, and then set the blend to 100 for a single frame, and then on either side of that you set the blend to 0. And this is usually done at either the beginning or the end of a clip. Just make sure that whenever you do a frame glitch, you're just being careful that it has a reason to be there. Like, it doesn't really make sense to just put a bunch of random frame glitches in the middle of your clip. It kind of has to like make sure there's intention with it. Like, for example, here I want it to kind of create an impact at the beginning of that clip, and it's kind of like synced with the music. Just make sure that it kind of has like a reason why, that you kind of have a reason why you're putting a frame glitch there, because that's what will make your edit flow good. Yeah, another one I really like from the MT glitch pack from Reactor is ground loop. This is pretty similar to brush strokes in After Effects. Kind of just gets that like glitchy striated effect. I think that's the right word to use there. But yeah, I'm just gonna use this as, I use this as like a frame glitch a lot. So like at the end of a clip. Yeah, it looks nice and scratchy. For this one, I'm gonna demonstrate basically the DaVinci Resolve equivalent of Minimax. And if you don't know what minimax is, it's basically like, it's kind of like directional blur, but it looks nice. So what is called in DaVinci Resolve is 𝙀𝘿𝙑𝙄𝙉𝙑𝙀. Then you want to uncheck lock X and Y. The slider only goes up to 0.01 right now, but you can actually type in 0.03 or whatever value you want, and then the slider will kind of change. But I usually like to go to about 0.03, and then you're gonna want to keyframe this and go a few frames forward and then put it at 0. And for this effect, you usually want a pretty steep curve. At least that's what I like to do. This just kind of adds the illusion of motion and like shakiness, which adds more impact. Alright, so chromatic subsample is one of the main effects I like to use. This is like a little bit of my personal sauce that I'm kind of giving away to you guys. I don't even really know how this effect works, but I basically just use it for frame glitches, and you can change this. There's a bunch of different color spaces you can choose from, and then you just fuck with this and you get weird lines. Makes for a really good like glitch effect. So I'm gonna put the blend on for 1 frame. And like playing it back, it's kind of hard to notice. So if you have a frame glitch that you kind of want more emphasis on, or you want it to catch people's eye better, you can just put the gain up for like that 1 frame, like slightly. And like that just makes it easier to see because it's brighter. Okay, this would be a good time to talk about depth of field effect, because I do want to do it on this clip because it's kind of zooming in. So that's like when you would likely have a depth of field effect if you're actually filming something. It's like if you're zooming in. Anyways, I have a tutorial on this on my channel about how to use runway ML or just mask it out and get a really good depth of field effect. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm just going to briefly go over this. This is a pretty advanced effect using like high quality edits. So I'm just going to show you guys how to do this in DaVinci Resolve real quick. You want to select your media 1, which is basically your input, Command C, Command V, or Control if you're on Windows. And that basically will automatically create a copy and merge it. Basically, you're going to have a foreground and a background. So the green is going to the foreground and the yellow is going to the background. Then what you want to do is basically rotoscope out the gun. And this might be a little bit daunting and time consuming, which is why if you have a longer shot or a more complicated subject that needs to be more precise, then you could use runway ML, which is like an AI green screen like kind of object track. It's hard to explain, but I have a tutorial on it and it's a really good free online software you can use. But I'm just going to do a simple mask for this one. So basically to do that, you select your foreground and then you click on this button. Basically this is a polygon, so you can make a custom shape mask. And I'm just going to do a pretty rough mask of this. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just make sure that your subject is completely inside the mask. And it will automatically keyframe the mask shape. So you don't have to worry about keyframing it, but basically just go through every single frame and then change the mask shape, and you can create new points inside the mask if you need to create more. Basically you just go through and mask it out for every single frame. It is kind of intimidating, but you know, just put some music on, get it done. It'll only take like 20-30 minutes. I will get back to you guys in a sec. All right, so I've masked out this entire gun. I've rotoscoped it out. As you can see, that only took me like 10 minutes, so that was pretty quick. But basically what you want to do after this is why I like node-based editing instead of linear, because what you can do now is you can apply effects only to media 1 by putting them in between this chain. So like if I wanted to just turn the gain up of that masked section, you can do that, or literally put whatever effects you want on it. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna feather this mask a little bit, so you just do soft edge. What you're gonna wanna do now is copy this mask and then paste it onto the background and then hit invert. And so now what we have is a section with just the background and then another section with just the gun. So then what you wanna do is, if you want to blur just the background, you do a defocus gamma or any type of blur, turn it up a bunch, and it looks like that. That's basically all you do, and then like that looks really clean already. Or if you want to just blur the gun, you can take this out and put it on the gun instead. Sometimes you gotta fuck with like the border width and soft edge, but like if you wanted to blur just the gun in a scene, that's what that looks like. But I want to have the background blurred for this part. So that's how you do a depth of field effect. All right, the last color effect I want to talk to you guys about is like pixelation. So in video terminology, this is called mosaic blur. and that's what gives you this pixelation effect. You can even change the color, or I mean, sorry, the shape to like triangle or hexagon, but I just leave it on square. And then turn the aliasing down so you can get like more detail. And then this is to adjust the size, and yeah, that's basically it. I just use this as a like frame glitch usually. So yeah, I'm gonna finish doing the rest of the color effects on this edit, and then I'll come back to you guys for the next step. All right, so I just finished doing all the color effects. This is what it looks like. Okay, the next thing you want to focus on is color grading and kind of like post effects. I'm gonna start with like post effects first and then go to color grading, which would be in the color tab. But yeah, what I like to do just to kind of add a little more like realism to the clips is this is pretty much the same thing as if you were to do like a magic bullets look, magic bullet looks or whatever. That is similar to what I'm about to do. So basically you want to keep this consistent throughout the whole edit. And one thing that I like to do is there's this node called a hotspot. It's basically exposure with a mask on it, with a circular mask. So I just make it big, like really big, and then I move it up to the top. So it's just kind of like hanging over the top like that. And I turn the primary strength down to about half. And then you can go in color, have it so only blue and green is checked, and bring the blue and green channels down. So it's just kind of like a reddish glow at the top. But you can actually change this to whatever color you want. I kind of want this, the CC on this edit to be like reddish though. It's actually kind of hard to see on this clip, so I'm gonna see what it looks like on like this clip. Yeah, I like that, I like that. That looks pretty nice. So I'm actually just gonna dial the post effects in on this clip because it just looks better. The other one was like all purple, so it's kind of hard to tell like what was actually going on. Anyways, yeah, I usually start with the hotspot, and then I add a glow, and don't do this one because there's no threshold on it. This one's better. And then you can put the threshold wherever you want to. This just basically sets like which values are affected by the glow, and then turn the spread up a little bit. What's cool is you can also affect the relative spread. So if you want more of a blue glow, you could turn the red down. If you want more of a red glow, you could turn the blue down and the green down, just to kind of give it a slightly like red tint. So yeah, I just kind of fiddled with the gain and gamma and the opacity. And this is a before and after of the glow. Just kind of adds a nice shine that is very pleasing to my eyes. So yeah, basically after you get that dialed in, you can pretty much just copy and paste it on every single clip. And like, obviously some clips might be brighter than others, so you can mess with the threshold on the glow for each individual clip. This clip is really bright, so I think I want to turn the threshold up a bit. All right, I have copy and pasted those two nodes onto every single clip. So now I'm gonna move on to actual color grading. And what I like to start with, I usually go on a clip that's like pretty similar to the rest of the clip, find a good average right here. That's pretty good. So I usually start with just dialing in the value levels. And if you don't know how to work this graph right here, there are lots of good YouTube tutorials on it. I'm not gonna explain it, but I'm just gonna tell you what I'm doing. So first I usually like to dial in a little bit of the shadows. Kind of bring in those shadows a bit more. And then I also like to boost the highlights slightly. That looks pretty good. And then you can do on off by clicking on this number right here. So that looks pretty good to me. After that, you can actually start adjusting the color. I'm also not going to explain how these work, but I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing. You don't really need to pay attention too much to this graph. I usually just look at the viewer to see my adjustments. So I'm just going to kind of bring in a little bit of that orangey or red tone. That's pretty much it. I don't usually do too much color grading, just kind of, basically I just tint it, that's about it. And then what you can do, again, here's the on off for that. What you can do is right click on the frame and then do grab still. And then what you want to do is go through every clip, right click your still, and then do apply grade. And that will just apply the color correction to every single clip. All right, so after I've applied the color grade to every clip. Yeah, it's just looking more and more finished, more and more glued together. After you've done this, there's one last step you have to do. We're gonna pre-render this one more time. Tutorial, pre-render 2. We're gonna go to AVI, change this to uncompressed. 1920 by 1080 is good. And then I'm just gonna go desktop, make sure the audio's exporting again. Add to render queue. Render well. Okay, so I'm gonna drag this into my media pool, and then you're gonna create one more timeline. So timelines, create timeline, and we're gonna call this, I'm just gonna call it final. And when you go in timeline settings, you're gonna want to make this into a 4K timeline. And the reason we're rendering in 4K is because YouTube has two compression algorithms, and by default it'll give you the shitty one, but if you make it video, if you upload a 4K video, it automatically switches it to like the good compression algorithm, so it'll make your YouTube videos a lot more clear and it'll just look better. And if you have the pro version of DaVinci Resolve, if you have the paid version, this is where you would use like the detail preserving upscale or whatever. If you have After Effects, I think there's also an After Effects thing where you can do an upscale, but for this I'm literally just gonna straight up scale the video up. There's no like AI involved or anything like that, so you can either just leave it at the default 4K, or what you can do is if you want that kind of wide angle like cinematic aspect ratio, you can change this to 16:06. Bruh. Okay, 4K 16:06. Yes. Okay. Then what you're gonna want to do is drag this into your timeline, and I have that nice cinematic aspect ratio. That is optional. You can leave it at a 16:9 aspect ratio if you want that. It's just up to you. And then basically what you want to do, this is the final step. You're gonna want to go into Fusion one more time and just add film grain. And this also helps your like compressed YouTube version look better, and it also just adds kind of a nice overlay of grain that if you do it the right way, it will just kind of glue the video together. So I'm gonna uncheck monochrome. Personally, I just like to have colored grain. Some people like monochrome, but it's up to you. And then basically just turn the master strength down a little bit until it's like kind of subtle, but you can still see it. That looks pretty good. That's like subtle enough. Just kind of adds that extra like cherry on top flair. Just like that filmic look. One more thing. Before the film grain, add a sharpen. This, and put it at like 0.3 or something, like, or 0.2 even maybe. You just want this to be nice and subtle, but make it a little bit more eye-catching. Yeah, I'm gonna say leave this at 0.2 or 0.3. But yeah, that's basically it. Once this is done, you basically just render it out, and that's about it. Oh, and for render settings, you're gonna want to go to MP4 for this final version. MP4, leave that as it is. All this is good. Make sure export audio is checked. All this is by default, that's fine. Then you can just go ahead and render it. And now you can finally watch your edit in full resolution. Very nice.